So I think it was about 2000, 2001. I started working with autistic kids. And I did that for about 7 or 8 years and loved every minute of it. And at first, I had no idea what I was doing. The only thing I knew about autism was I remember in one of my psychology classes, they talked about autism for like 3 minutes back then. So that was the only thing I knew. But I started working in families' homes and in the community. Learned a lot and became really passionate about supporting autistic kids. So then it got about 8 years into my journey, and then I thought, well, what happens when these kids become teens and adults? So I was living in Cincinnati at the time. Right around that time, I did research and didn't find a ton out there in terms of supports for adults. As it just so happened, timing can be everything. The Autism Society in Cincinnati at that time, they reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you like to run our support group for autistic adults?" So I started doing that, and I loved every minute of it. Learned so much from the adults in those 3 years that I ran the group. What I realized during those 3 years is those adults need supports in the home and in the community, similar to the kids I was working with, but in different ways, in relating to employment, in relating to the relationships in their lives, in
Yeah.
relating to reducing overwhelm, going into the community. That's when the idea for Autism Personal Coach came about, to provide coaching to autistic teens and adults. And it just started with me coaching two people initially in 2013 in that first week. And now we have about 13 different coaches, and we're providing coaching to people all throughout Northeast Ohio, all of Ohio, and now through the United States. I think the interesting thing is, like any business, we've been in existence for 11 years. If you're not growing and changing as a business in those 11 years, and if you're not growing and changing personally as a founder or an entrepreneur, you're probably not in existence 11 years later. From my personal experience back then, 11 years ago, I didn't know I was autistic. I just learned a few years ago. Some of our coaches are autistic, some are not. The majority are. I think being autistic and being a coach that is providing supports for autistics, it gives you an advantage in the aspect of, yes, all of our coaches have the educational experience, they have professional experience in supporting autistic people, but for our autistic coaches, having that lived experience, I think, is so critical in connecting with people, because the most important part of coaching is developing a trust and a connection
Sure.
with your client. And if you can't do that, then you can't be a successful coach. Now, our non-autistic coaches can do that certainly as well, and they've done a
Sure.
great job with that. But our autistic coaches, they just have that kind of, it's just that extra advantage. What I like to say is, if you know your what and your why, like what you're hoping to gain from coaching and why you want to gain that from coaching, and then don't worry about the how. That's our job with the coaching process, to help you figure out the how, because like you said, everyone's unique, and everyone, in addition to being autistic, they have all these other different identities, race, gender, religion, their interests. We just really individualize it and help people to figure out the how along the way. I think that's just really the key. So just know what you want, hopefully, from coaching. Even if you're not sure what is this whole coaching thing,
Right.
and why you want this thing in your life, then I think those are the people that are going to benefit from coaching. I think the way we look at it and how we've changed over the last decade plus is that we don't look at it as independence, we look at it as interdependence, because none of us are truly independent. For example, if I had to count on going out and hunting and fishing for my food, I would not survive more than two days because I don't think I would be capable of those things. So I really count
Right.
on grocery stores and their supply chains and their workers and things like that. So that's just one very small example of how I need others. It could be a long list of that. If we just take that basics framework that none of us are independent, we we are all interdependent. I think that's where things start. And I think another important part of independence or interdependence, however someone wants to frame it, is that it's important to think about autonomy in in this piece, in the sense that what do I really want to do on my own, and what do I want people to support me to do. For example, I definitely don't want to ever do any of my taxes. I don't want to learn how to do my taxes. So I have accountants always support me with that. I think it's just figuring out what do you, based on your skills and interests, what are your capabilities in doing things independently, and then from the rest, can we develop your support network, or can we better use your support networks? Because one of the things that we've seen with our clients, and I would say in general, and I don't know if this is exclusively for autistic people, but this is the community that we serve, is that we don't do a great job of using our support networks. It's about being more efficient in how we use our current networks and about growing those networks. And it's about thinking about autonomy for each person. And I think with our coaching is based on the framework of understanding yourself as an autistic person and using that framework in part of learning about independence and interdependence is really important. So it's all kind of within the autistic framework, understanding how your brain works and complementing things based on that. I think a lot of times with social skills, and not all the time, but a lot of times it's about moving an autistic person or just any neurodivergent person into being a neurotypical person. And that does more harm than good. So I think that's kind of where when we think about social skills, we kind of have to take a pause and think about how are these supposed social skills impacting each person's sensory differences? How is it impacting their executive functioning differences? How is it planning, organizing, remembering things? How is it impacting their communication differences? And while maybe an autistic person can learn what's supposedly correct social skills, the amount of energy it can take out of each person can be very draining.
Yeah.
How social skills impacts the rest of our life and getting other things accomplished, I think, is something that is not always taken into account in these situations. Very early on with autism personal coach, with coaching people, and even in that first year or two, one of the glaring things that kind of came up was just the lack of community that people have, feeling isolated. A lot of times, our clients would come to us and say, "Oh, I don't want any friends," or anything like that. And almost every single time through the coaching process, I would say probably 99% of the time when people have told us that, it's not true. It's just about how do you go about finding community. And in a lot of ways, our communities are not built for neurodivergent people to have access. So, what we tried to do was right from those first couple of years, build groups that autistic people could come to and feel safe and feel included and feel a part of. It's like we would have monthly dinners. We would go to the Cleveland Aquarium. We would go to sporting events. We volunteered at the film festival. So we've done all these things over the years in an effort to develop community. Another thing we did for done for several years. We aren't doing it this year, but we did it for like 5 or 6 years in a row. Is we created a group for people to walk or run in with the goal to walk or run in a 5K in the community. Just helping people to feel included and feel like they have a sense of community. We've seen a greatly impacts people from the sense that in reduce anxiety, can reduce depression just by feeling a sense of belonging, feeling a sense of community.